What's up, everybody? This is Brian Smith, lifelong Notre Dame fan and recruiting analyst. I live down here in Florida now, but I still follow Notre Dame very closely. And based on my experience around recruiting and whatnot, that's going to be part of this podcast. But basically, I wanted to share my thoughts on the three categories that I think that Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame need. And this probably kind of goes along with most top-level Power 5 institutions when they hire an offensive or defensive coordinator. And it's a little bit different for Notre Dame than some other schools. Part of that's location, et cetera. And I'll get on track with each one of those little categories here in a second. But overall, note the following. With Tommy Rees taking the Alabama job, and I had no problem with him doing that. Going to work with Nick Saban is absolutely understandable, and wish him the best. That being stated, here's an irony. Going into the 2023 spring practice session, Notre Dame's roster, as it matriculates into spring, obviously Sam Hartman is transferred over from Wake Forest and is now enrolled at the University of Notre Dame. Notre Dame's quarterback board, depth chart, recruiting, whatever you want to say, right now is better than Alabama's. It's just ironic, and that's how volatile. I'm not picking on Tommy or anything. It's just ironic because I was talking to a buddy of mine about this. And he still left, and it was probably time just for change for him. So, again, not bitching at Tommy, but the next coordinator has more to work with than at any point at Notre Dame since Jimmy Clausen was on the roster, and his last season for the Irish was 2009. That's pretty attractive. I mean, Hartman will be one of the top 10, 15 players probably in college football this next year, in my opinion, regardless of position. Probably top 6 to top 8 quarterback, maybe even top 3 to 5. It just depends. I mean, how much he acclimates and how much the offensive quarterback / quarterback coach, they have to gel and they have to bond, whichever individual it ends up being. I would find it very ironic if it didn't end up working out at least short-term better for Notre Dame than it does for a lot of other schools that are going through a change. Because I think anymore, if you look at most schools, they go through a lot of change. Alabama, I mean, Saban's guys go on to the NFL, coordinate somewhere else, or head coaching job, or some combination of that group. Notre Dame could kind of go that way with Freeman as well. Here's the thing. These are the three categories that I have, and this is the order that I want to kind of talk about. Number one is play calling experience. Notre Dame, as it's been said many times, is not a place you really learn on the job. There's some exceptions to that, but it's pretty rare, especially with the world that we live in with social media, as what I'm doing right here. There's just too many opinions, too many people that have a lot of money, and donors that have opinions, and play calling and quarterback play is at the top of the board. So it needs to be somebody experienced, and I'll get into that more specifically in a moment. Two is something I wouldn't have ranked here prior to now, but I was actually, and I'll give a shout out to some of the guys, Priester, O'Malley, Sampson. I listen to their podcast sometimes on Irish Illustrated, and I listened to one this morning, and they were talking about recruiting needs to be a part of it, because really that's the only thing left for Notre Dame to beat Georgia, to beat Ohio State, et cetera. It's just more players, because like Tommy shot himself in the foot. He did not evaluate and recruit well at quarterback. It was my one bitch and complaint about him. He was not good at it, but he's a good recruiter in general. It was weird. One of the odder things that I've seen, and I've followed Notre Dame recruiting for over 30 years, but he kind of came around, but he misevaluated some kids, and it really hurt Notre Dame. But now you got Hartman, obviously Carr's coming, et cetera. The next guy kind of needs to keep that train rolling along and actually add speed. Look at it this way. Ohio State is recruiting number 1 or number 2 receiver in every single class. Every single class. They already have Jeremiah Smith committed from South Florida. I know him, plays at Chaminade Madonna. In my opinion, he's the best player in the class of 24 as far as just overall talent, on the field, off the field, attitude, work ethic. If I could pick one player, you said, Brian, who's going to be the next guy to go to the NFL out of this class? Who's the best bet? It'd be Jeremiah. One of the reasons he's going there, primary, is they have quarterback play, they develop receivers, passing game. Notre Dame has stunk at that the last few years, and part of it, again, is Tommy didn't do well with that. The next coach needs to, and he'll probably be at Notre Dame 2 to 3 years, just like the guys at Alabama, LSU, wherever. That's kind of how it works. They need to elevate their recruiting. Receivers got to get a hell of a lot better. Quarterback needs to continue. I got to give Tommy credit. They got Minchie, and then in this class in 23, he is really good. For people out there, he is a really good football player. But then they got Carr coming in 24. He's locked in. If they can get a guy in 25, the class coming up is going to be juniors this fall, whoever this coordinator is, that's at least high arm talent. Maybe his floor is a little lower, but he has a lot of talent. If he could at least do that and keep that going, you can keep a lot of receivers. Jeremiah and the guys that are Ohio State's getting a receiver, they're going because they expect a quarterback every year. When I talked to him a week or two ago, we didn't even openly discuss Ohio State's specific quarterbacks. He just knew they had guys. It was a foregone conclusion. Half the recruiting was that alone because they do such a consistent job of it. So the next coach, number 2 for me, is quarterback. And then finally, this is a complaint I have at all levels of football. Drives me bananas about coaches. This will be on my list, my dying day for a coach, whether it's Notre Dame or elsewhere. And that's work well when you come into the job with the players that are there now. No bitching, no complaining. They don't fit my scheme. Too bad. Fix yourself. You're the adult. You're the coach getting paid. You figure it out. Adapt to them. If you can't, that's fine. Go work in the banking industry. Go work in a restaurant. Go do something else. Coaching is about adapting. I don't give a crap what these guys say. Adapt or get gone, period. It drives me nuts. That being said, that's why a lot of coaches leave. Coaches are the most stubborn people I've ever met in my life. Can't stand that part about it. And I let a lot of them know it. It's probably why I don't talk to a ton of them. They don't want to hear my opinions, but I don't care. I'm going to let it rip. All right, now let's get into this. Play calling experience. This is a really difficult thing because every school it's a little bit different. There's a nuance to it. For Notre Dame, they're on that cusp, but they're what I call a tier 2 school. Georgia and Alabama, in my opinion, are the only tier 1 schools right now, not even Ohio State. Their defense is nowhere near what it used to be. And they almost won it this past year, but they're not the same team they were overall. Their roster is just not as good. Their defensive coaching is nowhere near as good. Clemson obviously took a step back as well. Oklahoma is kind of iffy. The coaching staff's changed. We don't know what's going on with them. They're not even tier 3 after they got beat 49-0 by Texas. There's a bunch of teams, though, in that tier 2. Michigan certainly right on that edge. They're almost tier 1. I mean, they've been 2 playoff in a row. You can make an argument for them being tier 1. And then you got, Ohio State and Clemson are in there. Notre Dame would be right in there. Penn State would be in that group. Ole Miss should be if they can play any defense. Kiffin's a great play caller. We hadn't figured out defense, so I'm not going to go there. USC definitely. They got Caleb for 1 more year, but we'll see after that what happens with them at quarterback. But there's not many schools really, in my opinion, after that group. It is a major, major fall off. And it's just kind of the unknown. Part of that is the transfer portal. And that's why I think the following for Notre Dame is very important. They have to hire somebody. There's only those few schools that has either played, coached, or coached against those elite programs that I just mentioned, preferably Alabama and Georgia, and knows how to have success, has proven some kind of success. Now, in that vein, anybody can do a spreadsheet and say, well, so-and-so coach against Georgia since Kirby's been there X number of times, and he's 1-6. Well, so's everybody else. It's partially a situation where you have to look at it subjectively, and you also have to look at it recruiting, culture, understanding, adapting his scheme. How did he do when he had a quarterback that was a 5th-year senior compared to the next year when he had a redshirt freshman? Was he at least competitive? The consistency. Certain guys, their offenses tend to be a little bit too complex, and they'll be up here, and then they go, and they just dive bomb. David Shaw was a little bit like that at Stanford. He ran a pure West Coast, didn't apologize for it. And he, obviously at Stanford, they recruited a lot of really high-end academic kids. That's fine. But you're not going to do that consistently at the college level. You need about 5 years to learn the West Coast offense, build your body, do all the things you really need to do for most high school kids. Now, a 5-star, if Trevor Lawrence would have went to Stanford or something, okay, whatever. There are some differences, but not many kids can really run that. It takes forever. The playbook's ridiculous. That's why so many teams have went to RPOs. It's 4 or 5 basic plays, and you just change the formations. And if you got a special running back, you add some things for him, whether he's a guy that goes out of the backfield or something. Do they adapt? And can they use those things against Georgia? You're not going to have more talent than Georgia or Alabama. You're just not. Alabama just signed 9 5-stars by one of the services. You're not going to out-recruit Alabama. You have to out-scheme them. And I want to see proof that you've either played or coached with or against them. It's something where you're used to, okay, this is what it is. And I've tried to explain this to a lot of people who live up north. It's different down here because the front sevens in the SEC and the talent base that support them in the SEC is on a level that I really can't put it into perspective to you. You have to physically be on the field and standing next to them. Only so many people get to do that. But when you're standing next to the third team defensive tackle at one of these schools and his hand is big enough that when you shake that individual's hand, you can't see your own, you start to understand. I was at grad school at LSU for a while. I've been around a lot of the kids the SEC's recruited, etc. It's just different. Notre Dame needs to be able to see that because their D-line right now is something else. Doesn't have enough of that. But to beat those guys, you got to have somebody who understands how to scheme against them. 2, and to that point, right off of it, is recruiting. Notre Dame needs a quarterback coach who can go out and get those guys, but also in the in-home visits, he's going to go out and he's going to do things to help them at every other position on the field. He's not going to be worried about just a quarterback and receiver. He knows he needs an NFL offensive tackle in at least every other class. If Alabama or Georgia do it, you need to do it. You also need to help the defensive staff, even if that's just you run into a kid that's an underclassman and you know you're going to leave in a couple of years, which pretty much all coordinators do. They're any good. Or if they're bad, they get canned. Nobody stays around more than 3 years at a major program anymore. It's A or B. You need to be able to pass that along. You need to be a team player with recruiting, and you need to embrace it. Didn't used to necessarily be that way, and I didn't really look at it, but this is specific to Notre Dame. They got their systems kind of in place. You know, Freeman wants to run the ball, be a power team, and he's getting more and more talent at corners, but their corner recruiting is really good. So they can do things differently on defense moving forward. They need to help with the D-line. That's their biggest weakness right now. Got a lot of good players. They need some elite. We'll see how the transition goes this year with some of those younger players. They got, Cabrera and just a bunch of players that are on that cusp. Nobody knows, but they need some more sure bets. That guy has to help with that. And then finally, the thing that I hate even bringing this up because they'll probably get comments, wide receiver recruiting. Notre Dame finally had a good receiver class. Got to give Rees credit. He really helped bring that in. Well, all the guys that are on the staff need credit, not just Tommy, obviously. And the new guy that comes in needs to embrace that, utilize them just like the current roster. That's part of the current roster. And he needs to build on that. If they can get 2 classes in a row, 2 in a row, where they have top-notch wide receivers, they have an opportunity to take that next step. It's kind of weird how it works. As much as I go to 7-on-7 camps, combines, practices, games down here in Florida, and we are loaded with receivers. There were over 40 kids last year assigned D1, I'm pretty sure. State of Florida alone at wide. It was insane. So if you look at it and you say to yourself, if they could just get 3 really good receivers this year, one of them truly, truly pans out, and you get that system going, you're trying to get to the point where you're getting Jeremiah Smith. Right now, Jeremiah wouldn't have considered Notre Dame seriously for anything, and why would he? Notre Dame's passing game was terrible. Why would he consider Notre Dame? I get it. That's where you're trying to get, because the way the game's set up now, it didn't used to be this way 10 years ago. Outside the hashes is where the game's won against really good teams, because if you look at the playoffs, the teams that win score 35 or more, like 95%. It's insane. You have to win outside the hashes. NFL talent is number 1. Number 2 is NFL talent. And number 3 is NFL talent, period. If you don't have NFL wide receivers, you're not beating Alabama or Georgia. You're not going to beat them in the trenches. So you sure as hell better beat them out wide. Clemson at 18 and 20 had guys that could go get it. Trevor made a big deal. Obviously, that's part of the recruiting that Notre Dame's done at quarterback. If you want to have any chance, and it's still going to be hard to beat them because, again, not winning in the trenches is not good, but you're not going to out-recruit Georgia's D-line. Half the good players in the country who play D-tackle are within 500-mile radius of them and maybe even 150 miles. It's insane. So you're going to struggle with that. You need to be able to win outside that hash mark. Notre Dame hasn't done it for a long time. Need to get there. Finally, with the part about adjusting to the personnel, Notre Dame's receiver board is weird. The depth chart isn't set yet with all the new kids coming in. Obviously, I'm not even going to say his name. Well, I get Merriweather, I'll say once. But number 15 needs to be the priority this next year because they don't have anybody else like him in terms of just sheer speed. Out of that, I mean, Colsey's kind of close to that, and he's a heck of a prospect too. Lorenzo Styles kind of got lost at the end of last year. He didn't look comfortable at all. I was even questioning whether he wanted to really be a part of that offense, and kind of hard to blame him. But they lost their tight end. The receivers, with Mayer gone, it's going to be different. If the new offensive coordinator does not automatically accept, not forced into it, but that individual himself accept what he has and goes for it, it will not work. Players will see through it. There's another school, I won't mention the name, but I have really good sources with, and I talked to somebody that was going there this next season, and the position he was playing, the position coach told all the guys that weren't starters this last year to go to the portal. They lost a whole bunch of kids, and it's dumb. I mean, you have no chemistry. And then right after that, one of the kids they thought was coming back turned pro, and they're in a bad spot. In today's world, if you nix kids, they will leave. If you give them a hint, they'll leave. You tell them, obviously they will. Notre Dame's not the same animal. I'm not saying the position coach would tell all the receivers or DBs or any position to leave, but they need chemistry because they don't have many numbers. They have to work with what they have, get through this year. They could be okay to good. And then in 2024, you could really set the world on fire at the receiver position, even though Hartman's not going to be there. He's going to put up numbers this year, hitting check downs. Merriweather may end up with 15 touchdowns. Who knows? He throws the go ball really well, and that's what Merriweather does. The key, though, is whether or not those complementary pieces work, because when you play teams like Georgia, like Alabama, like Ohio State, USC, Clemson, that have corners, they're going to take away your best player at least part of the time, and if nothing else, they'll double them. Your complementary pieces have to do well, and that's one of the things that Alabama, like McConkey, great example with Georgia. No, I didn't know who the hell that guy was. I mean, I know his dad was, but I didn't know who he was in recruit. They found him. They developed him. They bought into him. He bought into them. He's been a really good slot receiver for the Dogs. He moves the chains. Not every guy's running a 4-3. He's a 4-5 guy that's shifty and has really good hands and will absolutely destroy you on 3rd and 6. That's pretty much what the Patriots did forever. It wins football games. Notre Dame needs that guy too. Is it Styles? Is it somebody else? Whomever it may be, the next offensive coordinator for Notre Dame needs to find that. And that's just one spot out of the 3 primary receiver spots, plus the 4 wide and 5 wide sets. They must find a way to adapt to the talent they have and make it as close as they can to what Ohio State and Clemson does, at least in scheme, and get athletes in space. To that point, just one last thing. There's not all just one position anymore. Chris Tyree needs to play slot quite a bit and run routes, even if it's just to clear out linebackers and safeties and different things. He's so gosh darn fast, it's not even funny. I don't think they used him very well. Running A-gap blast with a 185-pound kid is not a good idea. That's the one thing I didn't like about Rees's offense, too much of that. It's okay when number 7 at 228 pounds was doing it, but he's a different kind of football player. They need to utilize that talent better. And again, that's part of the adapting to what you have. So I'm going to end on that, but just think about the following. If they can get somebody that really understands what it's like to play against the big boys or has played for them, maybe it's somebody that played at Georgia or something, if they can get somebody that can really recruit, that'll help push the program forward. And especially for short term, it would be good if you could adapt, especially with those receivers, because that will also work with number 2 in recruiting. Kids see it, they'll want to come. Jeremiah Smith wouldn't come right now. Maybe in a year, the next guy like him would think about it. That's the key. So everybody have a safe day. Be good. Go Irish. Talk to you soon.